So just with this summer, I've had a handful of traveling stuff going on, work stuff, personal stuff. So I've actually just been on a lot of flights the last month, 6 weeks. But there was one particular flying experience I got that was pretty cool. I've got a friend who's a pilot. And this summer he was like, hey man, I want to take you up. We're going to just see some of the sights. And he took me up on his plane recently. And I tell you, this was a totally different experience than just going through check-in and flying United. We went right by the Flatirons and got to see some just the beautiful views right there. Took me right over Red Rocks Amphitheater, which was so cool and beautiful. Some of you guys may know Carter Lake. Maybe you've been out there before, and just these incredible sights. Not only that though, we actually took some laps right around the church. And we prayed over the church together inside his plane. I'm gonna tell you guys, prayers are just more powerful from a plane right over the spot. It just felt a lot more spiritual praying over the church from that angle. Now, for me, I have never actually had a fear of flying. That's just not something I've struggled with. But I did go on a flight a few weeks ago. And I remember sitting on this commercial flight, and you get just the obligatory announcement. You've heard this a million times. We're about to experience some turbulence. Please fasten your seatbelts. You guys all know this. You hear it so many times, I just almost ignore it now. I'm just like, whatever, it's totally fine. Well, a few moments after this announcement, the plane shakes so violently, the lights start flickering inside of the plane. And I'm like, okay. That was a little different than what I normally experience. And then a few seconds later, the plane shakes so much, there was space between my butt and the seat. I got airtime on the plane. And I'm like tightening on my buckle, and I had a moment where I'm like, now I know why people have phobias of flying. I'm looking out the window like, are there still wings on this plane? This better not be a Boeing aircraft right now, okay? Now, if there is one thing I have learned, turbulence is not just something you experience on planes. Life is turbulent. I just went on just a news site and did all the top stories just from one single day. This is from one single day, all the news stories. Assassination attempt on Trump. Israel launches major attack on Hamas commander. Ukraine releases thousands of prisoners to help in war. Dozens killed at religious event in India. Protests in Kenya. The presidential debate debacle. Is the housing market going to crash? Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce's relationship feels different. So, life is more turbulent than it has ever been. Just even our culture, people move more than ever before. We change jobs more than ever before. We switch schools for our kids more than ever before. Social media, news cycles, doctor's appointments, layoffs, marriage drama, kid drama. There is an endless list of stuff that will shake your life up. Now, we've been in this series all through the summer we are calling Enjoy the Ride. And if you are just joining us, we've been going through a letter in the New Testament called Philippians, written by a guy named Paul. And really, Paul's rally cry in this whole message is, enjoy this ride called life. There's so much to experience. There's so much joy to be taken out of it. Like, make the most of this gift God has given you called life. And today we're gonna look at a section in this letter where Paul is gonna talk all about turbulence. He's gonna talk about the instability of life. And in this one little passage, Paul is actually going to give us 3 practices we can implement in the middle of any turbulence you face in your life. But you need to catch something here. Paul's approach to this whole conversation is much different than how we would often think about it, even how our culture would think about this conversation, because when we face just shakiness in life, there's usually a typical response we have when we face it. Our first inclination is fix the problem. Solve the external issue that is causing this chaos in my life. There's forces outside myself I need to fix. Now, this is the argument Paul's gonna make here in this section. You will never totally resolve the external issues of your life. They'll never be totally resolved. There is always going to be turbulence that you're going to face. And so this is the case Paul's gonna make here. The secret to getting through turbulence is not external solutions, but internal stability. You need to become the type of person that can handle the chaos that comes into your life. It's about the internal side of your life. And so before we get to these three practices, you have to appreciate how shocking these things are for Paul to say at this moment in his life. If you're just catching us, Paul's in prison right now, okay? This is not a glamorous experience. Not only that, he is writing to people who are experiencing persecution right now and poverty. And so there's some serious turbulence going on for them. A lot of external circumstances they're trying to navigate. And if we were honest, if you look at Paul's moment and what these people are facing, really a reasonable expectation for what you would read in this letter is Paul saying, you know what? Time to pack up, guys. We've done our best. The neighbors are too crazy. The politics are too sideways. The housing's too expensive. It's time to get up and move. Let's just change locations. I would even expect Paul to be like, you know what? I think I'm done too. I've been trying this Christian thing. It's got me in prison. It's causing suffering in my life. You know what? I think I'm just going to forget God too, because clearly he has forgotten me. And yet Paul has a totally other approach. He's now going to provide three practices that he's going to challenge us to implement with whatever turbulence you face in your life. So if you want to follow along, we're going to be in Philippians chapter 4 today. I'm going to start in verse 4. Let's see what Paul has to say. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Okay, pause right here. Very clearly stated, Paul's saying, nope, not time to give up. This is not a time to run away in fear. No, the first thing you have to do in the turmoil you face in your life is you absolutely must cultivate the joy. Now, let's be honest here. Paul says rejoice. That's probably not a word you use Monday through Friday, right? It's a very churchy, kind of religious sounding word. But when Paul says rejoice, he's very simply meaning to delight in something. To rejoice means you are cheerful, lively, even excited about something. You find joy in it. And so Paul says you have to learn how to cultivate a certain type of joy. He says this is joy in God. And how often does he say we should do this? Did anybody catch that? When should we do this? Always. You don't wait until you feel like doing this. You don't wait until everything in your life gets just the way you want it. Paul says you have to practice this at all times in your life, in every circumstance. And this is what Paul is trying to say. If you can cultivate this kind of internal joy, it is going to produce a spiritual strength in you that will be able to handle the external issues you're going through. That's what Paul is trying to say. So then the question is, how do you rejoice? What does that even look like? And I will say there are so many different ways you can do this. Man, it can be done through praying through God. It could be recounting all the things he's done in your life. It could be through community, nature, all these things. But I want to hone in on just one practice, just one thing you can do to make some progress in actually cultivating this internal spiritual joy. And if you've been in church for a while, you don't even think about this that much. This is just part of your routine. But if you're new to church, this is something that probably has thrown you off when you first got introduced, and it is the singing portion of the church service. Some of you guys have been in church way too long, because anybody who's new to church, you walk in, you're like, what kind of weird Christian karaoke is going on in this building right now? This is very strange what these people are doing. But you have to see here, even the practice of singing every week, and the reason we do it every single week is you are working your rejoicing muscles when you do it. It's actually spiritual exercise because you are making a weekly declaration. Whatever problems are going on in my life, whatever issues are happening in the world, I will rejoice. I'm going to find my joy in God. I'm going to cultivate this inside of me. Now, I even remember just my journey just on this whole thing. And maybe it's similar to some of yours. The first time I got exposed to like worship services or church services, I was freaked out. I was just like, why is everybody singing? I saw people with their hands up. I was like, do they have a question or something? Are they trying to, like, what is going on in this room? And then I was just the passive observer. I just stand and checking things out. I eventually graduated, you could say, to just mild participant. So if the worship pastor was like, I want you to clap your hands, I'm like, all right, dude, I'll clap my hands for a couple seconds just to make you happy. I'll do it. But now I will tell you guys, after years of practice, I have become a fully engaged participant every single week. Because I have learned how important this practice is in my life to cultivate joy in God. And I'll be totally straight with you guys. I do not want to over-spiritualize this. In a typical month, just throughout the year, I'll have one Sunday where I am just so excited to come to church. I'm like, let's go. We're going to sing. I'm doing this thing. I got like 2 Sundays out of the month where I'm like, okay. I've done this 10,000 times, okay? And it feels a little bit more like going through motions. And then I'll have one Sunday. Can we do real talk right now? Can I be honest? One Sunday a month, I'm like, I do not want to be here right now. I want to go on a trip like somebody else on a Sunday. I want to go into the mountains or be on a lake somewhere. I'm just saying, I feel that way sometimes. But here's what I've learned. This is the secret. I've learned to rejoice regardless how I'm feeling. I come in the same every single week regardless how I'm feeling. And I know some of you guys think I sit right here on the front row because the pastor's supposed to sit there and those are the special seats. I actually sit there because I am a horrible singer and I don't want anybody in front of me hearing how terrible my voice is. That's the only reason I sit in the front. There's nothing to do with me being on staff or anything. But every single week, I'm right there and I'm deciding I'm going to rejoice. Because it doesn't matter how I feel. God is worthy of it. He is more than deserving. And I need this more than I even know. This is transformational for my soul. And if you would even take this one opportunity a week when you make it to church to say, okay, I'm going to lean in. I'm going to rejoice in God. You will see it start to overflow in the other days of your week. You're going to notice this joy welling up on Monday and Wednesday and at the end of the week of Friday. And you're going to notice it's more consistent. And you're not even going to fully understand it. But what's happening is you're cultivating joy in your life that goes deep down to your soul. And it's going to sustain you in ways you didn't even know it could. You'll have an internal state that's so much stronger than the externals happening around you. You got to cultivate the joy. Got to work on that joy. Now, there's another thing Paul says we have to do here, the second practice. Paul says you absolutely must access the peace. Cultivate the joy, access the peace. Paul continues right here in this section. He says, do not be anxious about, what's the word? Anything. Do not be anxious about anything. How does that hit you? Does that sound like a reasonable ask from God? Does this even feel possible? Does like Paul understand how real life works? They started doing some studies over the decades comparing the anxiety levels of different decades and generations. And when they started doing these studies, here's what was found. The anxiety of school children in the 1980s was already higher than psychiatric patients in the 50s. Today, 2/3 of college students report overwhelming anxiety. 36% of college students have an actual anxiety diagnosis today. There's a book that just came out this year. It's pretty fascinating. It's called Anxious Generation. And this author talks about how Gen Z in particular has more anxiety than any generation in history. Now, I am fairly certain that there's a good number of us in here in this room today. This is your thing. You're seeing a professional right now for this. You're on some medication for this thing. This is what you're desperately seeking to try to fix in your life right now, the anxiety you're experiencing. And whether you have a diagnosis or not, every single one of us in here knows that even just the daily worries of this life bring enough anxiety in and of itself. Most of us in here, you couldn't even imagine a scenario where you actually wouldn't be anxious about anything. Like, you can't even fit that in your mind, what that would even look like for you. Now, before we conclude that Paul is just some ignorant first century writer who doesn't know how real life works in the 21st century, let's see what he really means by this, okay? Paul says, don't be anxious about anything. Now, what Paul is not disregarding is the fact that you can have a very healthy concern about the situations you face. Read Paul's other letters. He's like, I got a lot of concern for the other churches I'm serving. I got a lot of concern for people in my life. There is a healthy concern you should experience when you have chaos. And it actually leads you to take productive action. It leads you to do something about the problems you're facing. It's totally healthy. You got a kid going sideways right now? Your money's going into the toilet? There should be some concern. That's totally normal. So what is Paul talking about? When he says don't be anxious, what Paul is saying is you should not experience excessive levels of concern in your life. You shouldn't get to a point where you are overly worried about things. You should never get to a point where your anxiety is disrupting your ability to function and respond in a productive way. And we all know this feeling, right? You ever have that? Your head is just spinning. You're thinking of all the potential scenarios that can play out. There's so many unknowns that you don't even know how the things are going to work out. It is paralyzing. Anxiety is just absolutely paralyzing for your life. You know what Paul is saying? God doesn't want that for you. You were not made to carry these overwhelming levels of paralyzing anxiety and fear in your life. That is not what God wants for you. Anxiety should not just be some cruel dictator that gets to run your life. So I know some of us in here, you struggle with this way more than some of the rest of us. I understand there's genetic components to this. I understand there's past trauma that can really make this a real struggle. And I also will acknowledge there is absolutely professional help. There are medications. There are so many great resources in our world today to help people go on this journey of getting freedom. And you should seek those out if this is something you really are having a struggle with. At the same time, though, Paul says there's one particular practice every person should implement whenever they are experiencing any level of anxiety in their life. Paul says this: do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. No matter how big, no matter how small, if you are feeling any anxiety well up in your life, Paul says, make sure you go to God with everything. In any situation, go to God. Now, at this moment, I know some of us are thinking this because I think this too when I read this passage. Well, of course, Paul says that. He's just a good little Christian, right? Just pray about it. It's all going to be okay, right? Christians just become a walking cliche after a while with all this stuff. And I know anybody in here, if you have ever attempted this before, this has been your experience. You prayed for something until it hurt. You went after God for something. You said, I literally applied this verse in my life. I've tried it. I've tried prayer, and I am an unsatisfied customer. God gets a 1-star review on Google for his answering prayer abilities. Doesn't work. I know so many people have come to this conclusion. Tried it, Brian. And can I just say I understand that tension? You seriously try prayer, you're going to have some of those experiences. This is where you question God. Does he really love me? Does he really care? Does prayer work? Does God exist? Because it doesn't seem to work. Now I'm going to press a little bit. Can I press just a little bit on us? Okay? Trust you guys to handle some real conversation here. I know there's many reasons why prayer may be answered and not answered in different ways, but I will say this. There is one reason why so many people are disappointed by prayer. You know what it is? They're doing it wrong. You're not doing it right. You're not actually doing what Paul is saying. Let me explain myself. This is how most people think about prayer. I pray, God fixes the issues in my life, everybody's happy. God's my fixer. And if he doesn't do what I want him to do, then I guess I'm just going to be disappointed and devastated. And I will say, if that's how you view prayer, you will be. You will be absolutely devastated by how it is not working in your life. If you don't get anything else from the sermon, you have to get this. Prayer is not primarily about fixing problems. Prayer is about accessing God's presence. Okay, the half amen I got there was not good enough, okay? Prayer is not about fixing your problems in your life. It's about accessing the presence of the living, supernatural God who wants to come into your life. That's what we do with prayer. Okay, golf claps. I can tell it's still summer. Okay. What is Paul talking about? He is talking about something so different than what most people are thinking. He says, first, you got to pray. Okay, I'm not trying to insult anybody's intelligence. He's saying, make sure you talk to God. Get him involved in your life. Invite him into what is happening around you. You pray. But he even adds another level. He says, petition him too. This is talking about making specific requests to God. Paul is saying, absolutely, bring your problems to God. Don't hesitate. Nothing is too small. Nothing is too big. Everything and anything. Petition God for it. But then he adds a third ingredient. Did you see what that third ingredient was? You absolutely must make sure you do this with thanksgiving, he says. Prayer requires a very specific posture before God. You go stand before a king, there is a posture you need to have. And Paul is saying there is a spiritual posture you need to have when you are trying to access the presence of God in your life. Here's what happens. If you don't have any type of gratitude or thanksgiving in your prayer life, you know what happens? It devolves into whining and complaining and blaming God. And you start developing this sense of spiritual entitlement with God, like, hey, God, I'm living a pretty good life. You owe me. I've racked up some points. I want to cash in now on how I'm doing with my life. Okay. Real word right now. God doesn't owe you anything. He's already done everything for you. He has died for you. He's forgiven your sin. He has gone all the way to the cross on your behalf. He doesn't owe you anything. I know it's hard to hear, but it's the truth. At the same time, it's not about you racking up points and demanding things from him. Remember, prayer's not about him fixing your problems. It's not primarily about that. Paul says in another letter, give thanks in all circumstances. Same idea. So there's nuance here. You got to understand the nuance, otherwise you're going to be frustrated. Don't thank God for difficult circumstances. Thank God in them. It's a very different thing. You're going through a hard situation. You don't thank God for that. Thank him in it. Take a moment. You thank God for what you know he's already done in your life. You thank him for the character you know he has, that you can trust him, that he knows all things, that he is working everything out for good. And if you will practice this discipline of just thanking God in all things, here's what will happen. Your eyes will start to move off the problems and they'll move towards the creator of the universe who has everything in his hands. And you were going to access something in that moment. You were going to be transformed from the inside out. And Paul says this is what will absolutely happen if you do this right. He says, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. The peace of God. What does it not say? Paul did not say, and God will fix every single one of your problems. Paul doesn't even say, and God will give you a crystal clear answer for why he's not answering it in the certain way he didn't want to answer it, and all the logistics of your life and what's going to happen in the future and all the uncertainties you have. No, Paul says, regardless of how God chooses to respond and answer your prayer, there is one thing he will absolutely guarantee: his peace. The peace of God. Think about that. Supernatural peace from God himself. That image of guarding is pretty powerful. Paul says God's going to guard you. It's this picture of an army surrounding a fortress that you're inside of to protect you. That army is facing the external forces while you are as safe as you possibly could be. And Paul is basically saying, God is going to surround you with all of heaven's army to protect your mind and your emotions and give you this peace in the middle of any chaos you are facing. And when you start to experience this, if you haven't ever before, it's almost trippy when it starts coming into your life. It's strange. It almost feels wrong at first, because what's going to happen is you're not denying reality. You're not just trying to do some positive, lying to yourself about everything just going perfect. You're not going to ignore the facts. At a soul level, though, here's what's going to be so strange for you when you experience this. You're going to have this feeling that goes beyond anything you can intellectually grasp. Paul says it's even beyond understanding. You are going to know deep down to the core of your soul, no matter what happens in this moment, in this situation, everything's going to be okay. Everything is going to be just fine. And when you start to experience that, there is no amount of external turbulence that is going to be able to shake you. You are going to be standing on solid ground down to your soul. That's the peace you need. That's the peace our country needs right now. So, cultivate that joy. Access the peace. And then we have one last thing here that Paul says we need to do. Paul says you absolutely must make sure that you control the content. Control the content. Let's see how he finishes this out in verse 8. He says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. In the 1970s, there was this psychologist. His name was Herbert Simon. He coined a term, maybe you've heard this before, called the attention economy. Now, what he was talking about is the fact that every single one of us has limited cognitive resources. And with that being true, he pointed out how attention really is almost a form of currency in your life. You spend it on different things. And now in our modern world, what has happened is attention really is the thing that businesses are competing for in your life. Right? You get endless notifications on your phone. You're getting dings, you're getting rings, you're getting all these different things. You have endless scrolling on social media, 24-hour news cycle, because whoever gets the most attention wins. That's just how things work. Now, this has become such a normal part of our experience today in this world. We don't even think about how we are just being obliterated with attention-seeking messages 24/7. Just think about it. Your phone, your computer, the TV, your watch. What's the message always say? Be outraged by this. Be terrified of that. Hate this person right here. Hate him so much. Want him to die. And it's just a constant, endless message thing. And this is why this is such a big deal, though. You got to catch this. This is just true. Your thoughts are your life. At the end of the day, you will experience your life through the filter of your thoughts. I mentioned at the top of the message that I personally have just never had a fear of flying. It's not been one of my struggles. Plenty of other fears. That's for another day. Nicole and I have some friends, though, and the wife is absolutely terrified of getting on a plane. Like if they got to take a flight, it is days of preparation. She's got special medications, even some drinks that help kind of calm things down a little bit before she gets on this plane. Now, this is why that is kind of interesting, though. You may not know this, but statistically, it is exponentially safer to be on a plane than in a car. You're way more safe 35,000 feet in the air than you are on four wheels driving down I-25. Now, this girl, though, she has no problems getting in her car. She drives to work, does her thing. But you put her on a plane, she is shutting that whole thing down. This is what's so weird about this. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what the facts are. You are going to tell yourself a story. And you are going to live in that reality you have created for yourself, whether it lines up with reality or not. And so, think about this cultural moment we're in. Endless messages are coming in, endless interpretations of events, different views of reality, and you just need to know God actually didn't design you for your mind to just be flooded constantly with negativity and fear and lies and things that are dirty and shameful and even destructive. And if you just allow that content into your mind, it is going to shape the life you experience on a daily basis. So this is what Paul says. You have more power than you even realize. You can actually control the thoughts that come into and move through your mind. Think about that. God has given you that ability. And even with all the darkness and the brokenness and the bad things in the world, Paul says there is so much beauty and so much goodness and so much to be enjoyed in this life, and you need to be on the hunt for these things. Did you see what Paul said? Man, you got to fill your mind with what's true, with what's noble. It's this idea of majesty and greatness. He says things that are right and pure, even this idea of reverence and awe, things that are lovely, admirable, excellent, and praiseworthy. Fill your mind with that stuff. It was a little bit less than a year ago. Nicole and I, we enjoy a movie from time to time. And I remember one time Nicole had this conversation with me. We were getting ready, like, what do you want to watch? And Nicole's like, hey, would it be okay if we just kind of watched less movies that have just all this unnecessary and gruesome violence? Like, it just feels like a lot sometimes. And I looked at her, I'm like, babe, what? You don't want to watch John Wick kill 400 people in 90 minutes? You don't want to watch that? And so she was just like, I just feel like I don't want to allow things in my mind that are just gonna not be great for me. And so it's funny, that one conversation has actually shifted the way Nicole and I even just digest movies in particular. Because now we kind of ask, like, okay, is this just gonna fill our minds just with gross, grotesque, gruesome stuff for the next 2 hours? And now, when we watch a movie, even just recently, we watched this documentary, and I remember by the end of that documentary, I just felt so inspired. I felt so lifted up. I felt like I had fresh hope in what God could do in my own life and in the world. And I'm like, I think that's what God wants us to experience more consistently. That's what we're supposed to just fill our heads with. And just think about just your life even right now. Who do you follow on social media? What are they saying? Do you need that in your head? Do you really need to know what's happening every single moment of every day in the political sphere of our country? What podcasts do you listen to? Is it really good for your mind? Where is it steering the content? Movies. What's on your phone? The apps use just everything. Just constantly have this filter. Is this really the type of stuff I want to be filling my head with? And there's so much more we could say about this. This is literally an entire sermon series you could do on this kind of thing, talking about just our mind. I want, though, to give you guys some handles so you have something to leave with today. So for anybody in here, this is an area where you're like, man, I would just love to be able to discipline my thinking better. I get sucked into negativity. My brain just kind of goes in all sorts of directions. I got just 2 resources I would love to encourage you to go towards, and this will take you further than I ever could in a sermon. The first one is a book. It's called Winning the War in Your Mind. It's actually by Pastor Craig Rochelle. So practical, so accessible, easy to read. He talks about things like removing and replacing. He talks about catching lies, doing declarations over your life, even pre-framing your future, just all these great tools and tricks. Great audiobook even too. So check that out. Listen to it on your commute. You'll get through it pretty quick. It's great. Now, for anybody in here who maybe wants to go to the next level, okay? I just want to prepare for you. This is maybe not for everybody, but some of you guys might be interested. There's another book. It's called Feeling Good. Now, the reason I want to prep you for this is a much more technical book. It's a lot thicker and dense. So if you don't think of yourself as a reader, it might just be a harder place to start. But I want to tell you guys, this is the single greatest book I have ever read in my entire life on detecting negative thoughts. The lights are going down. We can handle that, all right? Just deal with it, everybody. It's the best book I've ever read on detecting negative thought patterns and replacing them with positive ones. He talks about managing your inner dialogue, dealing with the fear of failure, different motivations in your life. And you need to know, church, if you can master your mind, you can take control of the content entering your head, you will change your life. You will experience a totally different life, and you're going to enjoy the ride so much more. And so, as we close today, everybody, I want to let you know that I actually have a concern right now. Not anxiety, just a concern, okay? I'm concerned about this message. Because as I was prepping this, the only thing I could think of was, cool, 3 little practical tips. Cultivate the joy, access the peace, control the content. And I know what's going to happen. For most of us in here, you're going to go, great, I should pray more. I should think better thoughts. And then Monday's going to hit tomorrow. And your life is going to go straight back to external chaos and turbulence. And so, how can we make sure this actually changes your life? If you did this one sermon and you heard no other sermons, this would fundamentally change your entire life. How do you do it? Well, Paul actually gives us the charge here because he knows this is an issue too for all of us, a challenge. Here's how he closes out this whole section. He says, whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into, what's the word? Practice. This is the final charge for all of us, everybody. You must put it into practice. Paul is not giving us a one-time formula. You don't just press a button and all these things just come into your life magically. And you guys need to understand, the reason why most people never experience the sustained joy and peace of God is because they have not cultivated a soul that can actually handle it. You haven't yet created the internal infrastructure that can carry the very peace of God in your life. And so this takes practice. This requires discipline. This is going to take a long time for you to really see all the fruit of the hard work. It's just like working out, guys. You go to the gym once, you're gonna see 0 results. You just do one day here, another day there, tweak your diet there. You guys all know, over time, you start to see a little progress. What if today you just decided, you know what, the moment the anxiety starts stirring up in me, I'm gonna stop. First thing I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna go to God. I'm just gonna go to Him. I'm gonna see if this actually works. You know, when I'm in church, instead of maybe just kind of sitting there staring, at Solon while he just kind of sings, I'm gonna engage. I'm actually gonna sing the words out of my mouth and see if it does anything to me on the inside. I might even do a little bit of this, just a little bit, just to see what happens. And you start working at this. You start thinking, man, I'm gonna adjust how I do media in my life, what I allow into my mind. You do a little bit, just day by day. You keep practicing it. You don't beat yourself up when you slip up here and there. You just keep going. 1 year from now, 5 years from now, what kind of person could you be in 20 years if you were just practicing this a little bit every day? I'm telling you, you won't even recognize yourself. You're gonna be a totally different person. You're gonna enjoy that ride so much more. And Paul, just as a final little encouragement, he says, hey, as you practice this, just one thing I want you to know, be encouraged by this. He says, and the God of peace will be with you. You practice, Paul says, God's gonna bring his very peace into your life. You're gonna access his presence. You're gonna experience a level of stability and security and strength you didn't even know was possible. And whatever turbulence comes your way, you're gonna enjoy the ride. Do you receive this today, church? I believe it's just a word from God that we need today. We are gonna sing a song here in just a moment that speaks right to this, but I wanna pray over us right now. Lord, I just wanna thank you that this is your heart for us, God. God, your desire is for us to experience peace and joy, to live an anxiety-free life. Lord, you want our mind to be filled with things that bring life and hope and goodness. God, that's your heart for us. I thank you that you're such a good Father, Lord. But now, Lord, I want to pray over our church. I know this is a struggle for all of us. Oh, Lord, our minds are flooded with chaos. There's so much to be anxious about right now. Just by the things represented here online in the room, I know it, Lord. So I want to pray specifically, Lord, over anybody who has a severe struggle over anxiety here today, Lord. I pray for a special grace over those people. I know this is a debilitating struggle for so many. So Lord, I pray a special grace over them. Lord, I pray for anybody right now that has serious external turbulence in their life right now, that feels out of control. They feel like they just can't handle it. But God, I pray truly that you would allow them to start accessing your very presence, that you would give them your peace, God. Lord, I pray you would transform us so we can not only just enjoy this ride, but we can bring glory to you, Jesus. And we pray this in your name. Everybody said, amen.